TV presenter Jeremy Clarkson has revealed that he's been diagnosed with aggressive prostate cancer in an emotional video.
Jeremy Clarkson spent a lifetime caged by the people who signed his checks, never once told his work was good. Then he looked across at Mat Armstrong and said something that cut right to the bone. It made the old guard of British television deeply rattled, and they have very good reason to be, because what Clarkson admitted out loud, almost by accident, is the secret the BBC built its entire empire on keeping locked away from people exactly like you, the man who was never once told he was good. To understand why this matters, you have to understand the cage that Jeremy Clarkson lived inside for most of his life. Most of you know him as the loudest man in motoring, but the loudness came much later. He clawed his way up through small regional newspapers, reviewing cars and grinding out motoring columns long before a camera ever pointed in his direction. He walked onto Top Gear for the very first time on the 27th of October, 1988, and the producer who hired him, a man named John Bentley, chose him for one simple reason. Bentley wanted an enthusiastic motoring writer who could make cars on television feel fun, and Clarkson stood out because he was funny. That was the whole gift. He could take the dullest car on the planet and make it feel like the most thrilling thing you had ever laid eyes on, and the channel built an empire on the back of it. But here is what the highlight reels carefully leave out. Every joke, every comment, every reference he made was picked over by the people sitting above him. He has spoken openly about how the corporation managed him, and the bitterness in it is real and raw. After he finally walked away, he said that, in all his years there, not one single person ever once told him his work was good. His exact point was that they would watch the footage back, and you would never get a wow, never get a that was good. Not in 27 years of it. He even said, quite brutally, that the place was stuffed full of talented and hard-working people who were absolutely rubbish at managing talent. Then, in 2015, the whole thing collapsed. There was an ugly incident in which he physically struck one of his own producers over something as small as a cold dinner at the end of a long day of filming. The corporation suspended him, and within weeks they announced they would not be renewing his contract. The man who built their crown was shown the door without ceremony. And what he chose to do next is the entire reason this story exists at all. He did not beg to be let back in. He walked straight across to Amazon and built the whole thing again from scratch, on his own terms, with his old friends right beside him, in a deal the papers valued at around £160 million. For the first time in his working life, nobody was hanging a sword over his head. He later said the new people would watch his work and actually say the word "wow" out loud, the very thing he had never once heard in all those years before. Freedom, it turned out, sounded like a single word he had waited his whole career to hear. So when a man carrying that exact history looks across at someone like Mat Armstrong, he is not simply admiring a clever mechanic. He is staring straight at the freedom he had to bleed for. And that is where this story takes a turn the BBC would much rather you never follow. The kid in the workshop who skipped the queue. Mat Armstrong did something Clarkson was never permitted to do. He reached millions of people without asking a single soul for permission. Most of you already know roughly who he is, so I will keep this brief. He came from nowhere fancy. He was a BMX rider until his body gave out on him, and then, almost by accident, he started filming himself rebuilding a wrecked Audi that his partner had crashed. A car he bought back from the insurance company for a few £100s. There was no network behind him, no executive signing off his ideas, no studio handing him a budget. There was a workshop, a camera, and a stubborn refusal to accept that a broken car was a dead car. People could not look away from it. Then the world locked itself indoors during the pandemic, and with all that empty time, he dragged a battered old Bentley back from the dead and posted the whole thing online. That was the build that pushed him past 100,000 subscribers, and from there, the climb simply never stopped. Today, he sits with just under 7 million subscribers, with close to 1 billion views, and he did every bit of it without a television executive ever once giving him the nod. The comment section became his commissioning editor. The audience became his only boss. And that word, permission, is the quiet heart of this entire thing. Clarkson spent 27 years asking for it and rarely getting it. Mat never had to ask for it once. Two men with almost identical instincts, the same fearless cheek, the same urge to do the thing the polite establishment says should not be done, separated by a single generation and one enormous change in who actually holds the power. One of them had to fight the gatekeepers his whole life. The other simply walked around them as though they were never there. But before we get to what Clarkson actually said about him, you need to understand the moment that pulled his attention onto Mat in the first place. Because it involved a hypercar, a billionaire, and a phone call that genuinely should not have happened. The Bugatti that made a billionaire pick up his phone. Alex Gonzalez lived in Miami, and he made most of his money trading currencies online. At 24 years old, he bought himself a Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport. This is not a normal Bugatti. Only 60 of these were ever built. It runs an 8-liter engine with 16 cylinders and 4 turbochargers. It makes around 1,500 horsepower, and when it left the factory, it cost somewhere north of £3 million. Then Alex drove it into the back of a truck. The airbags went off, the entire front of the car was destroyed, and one of the rarest machines on the road was suddenly worth a fraction of what he paid for it. Most people would ring the insurance company and move on. But this is Bugatti, so Alex rang the factory instead, and the number they gave him is what started all of this. The first quote to fix the car was around $1.7 million. They later brought it down to about $600,000, and he still said no, because he was already paying somewhere between $70,000 and $90,000 a month just to finance the car in the first place. So the car was written off. An expert was flown in all the way from Paris just to look at it, and it ended up listed on a salvage auction site, the same place you would find a flooded pickup truck. Alex bought his own car back, flew a man over from England, and handed him the keys. That man was Mat Armstrong. Then Bugatti did something telling. They blacklisted the car's identification number, which means no dealer anywhere could sell a single official part for it. The message was clear enough. This car belongs to us, not to you, and you will not touch it. So why would one of the most powerful men in the entire car world feel the need to respond to a YouTuber at all? What did he see coming that frightened him enough to reach for his phone? The answer has very little to do with airbags and carbon fiber, and almost everything to do with a secret these companies have been guarding for years. The lock they never wanted you to find. Here is the thing the glossy brochures will never, ever tell you. When Mat went after his Ferrari, everyone assumed the hard part would be the metal. The bent panels, the crushed front end, the pieces lying on the workshop floor. And to be fair, the car was in a dreadful state. He had picked up a wrecked 296, which is Ferrari's clever little hybrid that pairs a 6-cylinder engine with an electric motor to make around 819 horsepower. The floor was pierced. The suspension was torn clean away. The wiring was ripped out of it. Any normal person would look at that and call it the real challenge. It was not the real challenge. The real challenge was the electronics. When he finally got the car back together and turned the key, it flashed up a message that read, "Hybrid system failure, Go to dealer. 4 small words doing an enormous amount of work. Because the car was not broken in the way you imagine a car breaking. It had decided, on a software level, that it did not trust the situation, and it refused to wake up until an approved Ferrari technician told it everything was fine. The real lock was never the bodywork. The real lock was a line of code, and only the manufacturer holds the key to it. The whole game has quietly changed underneath us. Fixing a car used to be a question of whether you were skilled enough. Now it is a question of whether you are allowed. Ferrari told Mat plainly that they would only work on the car if it was complete and signed off by one of their own approved body shops. But he had already fitted it with a genuine race kit from the track-only version, which is not road legal, which means it could never pass that inspection to begin with. The door is always left just slightly shut. He spent a small fortune trying to get past it. By some accounts, he carried around $11,000 of parts to Ferrari, and the whole thing spiraled into what one motoring writer called a $131,000 nightmare. A single battery quote came back at around 18,000 pounds on its own. This is not fixing a car anymore. This is paying a toll to be let back into a club you were never supposed to leave. These manufacturers are not protecting you from danger. They are protecting a business model where you stay dependent on them forever. And Mat Armstrong, with a workshop and a camera and a few million people watching, was quietly proving the lock could be picked. Now you understand why a billionaire reached for his phone. It was never really about safety at all. It was about what happens to that entire model the moment ordinary people stop believing the lock is real. And that exact fear, the fear of the gatekeeper losing his grip, is something Jeremy Clarkson understood better than almost anyone alive. Because the gatekeepers kept their hand on his collar for 27 long years. Which brings us, at last, to what he actually saw. What Clarkson actually recognized. Now we arrive at the heart of it, the thing that quietly rattled the old guard. When Clarkson looks at someone like Mat, he is not seeing a rival in the slightest. He is seeing the exact road he himself was never allowed to walk. Think about the parallel for a second, because it is almost uncomfortable when you lay it out side by side. Both men came from nowhere fancy. Both flatly refused to be told no. Both built their entire reputations on a kind of fearless cheek, on doing the precise thing the polite establishment insisted should not be done. Clarkson took a dying television format and grabbed it by the scruff of the neck. Mat took a dying car and dragged it back to life with his bare hands. The instinct underneath the two of them is completely identical. The difference is everything. Clarkson had to win his freedom inch by painful inch over decades, fighting executives the entire way. And even then, they snatched it back from him in the end. Mat was simply born into a world where that cage no longer existed for him. He never had to ask a single soul for permission to reach millions of people. He never had to soften a joke for a nervous manager. He never had to wait 27 years to hear that his work was good, because the audience tells him so in real time, every single day of the week. He spoke about how Mat holds full creative control over his own ideas, the very thing he himself was never truly allowed to have on television. He understood, perhaps better than he wanted to, that a man in a workshop with no network behind him could now build a following that might one day dwarf anything the old machine ever produced in its prime. That is not a thought the BBC would ever want broadcast, because underneath it is really a confession. It admits that the gate they guarded so fiercely for so long has simply been walked around, and that the talent does not need them the way it once so desperately did. There is a moment that ties these two worlds together so neatly, it almost feels scripted. Mat once rebuilt a wrecked Lamborghini Aventador purely to chase down a lap time, and the time he was hunting belonged to Jeremy Clarkson himself, a 1:59 that has stood untouched for years. His team beat all the others who had tried. They simply could not catch Clarkson. The old legend's mark still stood, perfectly intact, even as the entire new world threw everything it had at it. And somehow, that is the perfect picture of the relationship between these two men. The new guard chasing flat out, the old guard still just out of reach. The pair of them connected forever by a single number on a wet track. But the establishment was never going to sit quietly while the power drained out of its hands. And what the BBC has just done about it is the part almost nobody is talking about. Why the BBC suddenly wants the workshop. For decades, the deal was simple, and it was ruthless. If you wanted to reach millions of people with a show about cars, you went through the networks, and the doors only opened for the people who agreed to be managed. Clarkson lived inside that exact bargain for almost his entire working life. Mat Armstrong tore the whole thing up without even seeming to notice it had ever been there. Now watch closely what the institution is doing about it. At the very start of this year, the corporation announced a sweeping new partnership with the very platform that built creators like Matt. They are putting their own content directly onto it, launching brand new channels there, and most tellingly of all, they have set up a fully funded scheme with the National Film School to train the next generation of online creators. Their own Director General called it a groundbreaking partnership that would help them connect with audiences in fresh new ways, and described it as an unprecedented program to upskill the next wave of creators right across the country. The institution that kept its hand clamped on Clarkson's collar for 27 years is now openly trying to recruit and shape the very creators who escaped it entirely. The workshop beat the studio so completely that the studio has come knocking on the workshop door, cap in hand. And that is the deeply uncomfortable truth sitting underneath this whole story. The thing the old machine would much rather you did not stop and dwell on. The power moved. It drained right out of the offices and into the hands of people with a camera and a wrench and an idea. And it is not flowing back. Think for a second about what that actually means for a man like Matt. Television would hand him a far wider audience, the kind of reach that stretches well beyond car people and into living rooms across the entire country. But it would arrive carrying the oldest price in the business, the very same price Clarkson paid for 27 years. Somebody else gets to decide what you say. Somebody else quietly holds the leash. And the great unspoken question hanging over every bit of this is whether a man who has only ever known total freedom would ever willingly hand a piece of it back, even for all that reach in the world. Clarkson, of all people, knows exactly what that trade costs a man, which is perhaps why his quiet admiration carried a warning buried somewhere deep inside it. So here is what I keep circling back to, again and again. The locked Bugatti, the 4-word warning glowing on the Ferrari screen, the silence of those 27 years, the sudden charm offensive from the old guard. Every single one of those things is the same story, simply wearing a different coat. It is the story of a few powerful gatekeepers slowly realizing they no longer hold the only key, and a man in a workshop quietly proving it to millions of people, night after night, who never once needed anyone's permission to watch. So what do you honestly think Clarkson saw when he looked across at Matt, a younger version of himself finally set free, or a quiet warning about exactly where all of this is heading? Drop your real thoughts down in the comments below.